Hey guys, welcome back to the channel. My name is Derek Coffey and I'm the founder of FWP. And if you happen to watch the news yesterday, then you noticed that the stock market experienced a bloodbath. And unfortunately, it's looking to be the same way today. And the reason this is because President Trump decided to move forward with his tariff plan. He implemented a 25% tariff on anything coming from Canada or Mexico. And then he also added an additional 10% on anything that's coming from China. Now, typically, when tariffs are introduced, especially in a high inflation environment where the consumer could end up paying more, the markets aren't going to respond positively, which they didn't. Now, for most people, you're going to make the move to something safer, to bonds maybe. And bonds are great. They do provide that protection element, but they typically limit the growth potential of your portfolio. So instead of looking at bonds, I went to look for stocks that were performing decent with the markets being down the way that they were. Now, when it comes to safety and stability, I like to look for the blue chips, those big companies that own the space that they're in. And the easiest place to find that is on the Dow. Now, although the Dow was down over 1.5%, there were still a few names that were up. In this video, we're going to get into the four names that were not only up yesterday, but are also up so far today. And then at the very end of the video, we're going to plug this into a portfolio. That way, maybe you can make some changes to the equity positions you have to kind of ride out this Trump tariff that we're having to deal with. Stay tuned. So before we go any further in the video, I'm going to give you the standard disclaimer that I give in most of these videos. In the disclaimer today is that I do not want you to take any of this information as investing advice. Yes, I understand the markets are choppy. It's definitely a reason to worry because we don't know what's going to happen in the foreseeable future. But I don't want you to take the information from this video and implement it into your own plan. That is not its purpose. The purpose of this video is to help educate you and to inform you. Now, if you want to make changes to your investments, then I would urge you to run it by your licensed professional. Make sure that it's going to fit your plan and that it's not going to screw anything up over the long term. So now that we have that out of the way, we can actually get into the stocks that have done pretty well yesterday and at least the first half of today. Now, when we talk about those blue chip stocks, we are talking about the Dow, as I alluded to earlier. And these companies are large. They've been around for a long time and they own the market that they're in. Whatever it is that they do, they're so efficient and the products that they offer are so much in demand that there's not a lot that shakes them. It's usually something very major that affects the overall market that's going to affect these names specifically. The first stock we're going to look at is Johnson & Johnson. Now, Johnson & Johnson is a major player in the medical field. They focus on pharmaceuticals, biotech, and the medical technologies that help our healthcare system continue to function as it has. Now, you're probably familiar with some of the brands that they own, like Listerine, Band-Aids, and even Tylenol. But Johnson & Johnson is very large. They own a bunch of different brands, and it diversifies their income streams. And it just so happens that they make most of this stuff in America. So the tariffs that are being put on products doesn't necessarily affect them as much. Now, Johnson & Johnson is part of the Dividend Kings, and the Dividend Kings are companies that pay a dividend, and they've done so at least for the last 50 years, and they've increased that dividend every single year. Johnson & Johnson's dividend yield, at least as of this video, is around 2.95%. So for every dollar that you invest in Johnson & Johnson, you're going to get about 3 cents worth of return in the form of dividends. The next stock we're going to look at is Procter and Gamble. Now, Procter and Gamble, unlike the other three that we're covering, they are not in the healthcare sector. They are in the consumer staples sector. Now, the reason consumer staples is so important, especially when things are going awry in the markets, is because these are items that people need to live. Now, you probably use Procter and Gamble products whether you know it or not. Some of those names include Tide, Gillette, Head and Shoulders, Charmin. All of the things that are going to keep your life sanitary, Procter and Gamble sells it. Now, with Procter and Gamble, they're also part of those dividend kings. They've been paying a dividend, an increasing dividend, for the last 68 years, and currently, their yield is 2.27%. So for every dollar you have invested in Procter and Gamble, they're paying you about 2.5 pennies for your ownership stake in their company. The third stock we're going to look at is Merck. And with Merck, we move back into the healthcare industry, more specifically the pharmaceutical industry. Merck is a giant in the pharmaceutical industry, and they focus mostly on preventative medicines. Yes, they have other medicines that people use, but some of the ones you may have heard of are things like Keytruda and Pneumovax and Gardasil, all things that are going to help prevent diseases from either becoming an issue or getting out of hand if you contract them. Now, Merck, although they're not part of the dividend kings, they do pay a very nice dividend. They pay about 3.48%. So if we do the same math as the other ones, every dollar you have invested in Merck, you're going to get almost 4 cents back in the form of dividends. And the fourth and final stock that's actually performed pretty well since yesterday and even the first half of today is Amgen. Amgen is a biotech company. They focus on medications for blood disorders, cancers, and anything that's rare. Now, like the other companies, Amgen does pay a dividend. Unlike the other companies, that dividend is much smaller. Right now, the dividend yield for Amgen is 1.61%. Again, it's better than nothing, but it isn't that 3% that we're seeing with some of the other companies. Now, what you'll notice about these four stocks is that three of them are in healthcare, one of them is in consumer staples, but all of them pay dividends. They all return something to the shareholder outside of just the appreciation of the stock. Now, the good part about this is that income component is what creates stability, just like bonds. The safety of bonds is in the interest payments that you're going to receive. That guaranteed income, or mostly guaranteed income, is what makes bonds safer than a non-dividend paying stock. So with these four stocks, just like the majority of the stocks that are on the Dow, you're going to get that income component. You're going to get that stability that you're probably looking for when markets are acting the way they are. In addition to that income component, remember, these companies are huge and they own the markets that they're in. When you put all of those things together, it helps with the volatility of whatever the overall stock market is doing. And to prove that to you, I want to show you the graphs and how these stocks have performed at least over the last 24 to 25 years. So when it comes to building a hypothetical portfolio, it's probably a good idea not to rely on just the last day and a half of performance to try and make a point. Well, the good part about these four stocks specifically is that these companies have been around forever. They've been around for a long period of time. So if we back test these four stocks specifically, we can see how they've performed when other situations have come up. Now, with this hypothetical, we're assuming that we're taking the equity portion of a portfolio and changing it out for these four stocks. We're not touching bonds. We're not touching any of the safe stuff. We're only talking about the equity portion of a portfolio. And again, this is hypothetical. But if we start in January of 2000 and we take 25% of all of our equity allocated money and put it into each of these four stocks, we can see how this portfolio would have performed over the last 2.5 decades. This portfolio specifically has returned 8.2% since January of 2000. That is a really good rate of return over the last 24 or 25 years. And to prove to you why that's the case, if we compare it to what the S&P 500 has done, where it's only returned 7.58%, it has outperformed the S&P 500 by about 70 basis points. Now, to show you why that 70 basis points is so valuable, we can look at the graph and see how it actually operated over time. So if we go back to December of 1999, we can see that the Trump tariff portfolio hasn't done too bad. It just hung steady, which is really good considering what was going on at the time. And it actually outpaces the S&P 500. The last time the S&P 500 was actually worth more than this portfolio was at the end of September in 2000. After that, this portfolio has outpaced the S&P 500 ever since. We can see what happened during the Great Recession. Both lost value, but again, the Trump tariff alternative is still higher. And then it followed the bull market, just like the S&P 500 did, all the way up. Now, what you will notice is that as we get closer to the pandemic, the volatility does pick up a little bit. And that's because you have consumer staples where we were running out of toilet paper and nobody could buy anything. So Procter and Gamble didn't do as well. But then you had the healthcare companies who were trying to get the vaccines up and running, or whatever treatment option they could come up with, they were trying to get it to market. So the overall market, in addition to just the economic conditions at the time, that's what attributed to the choppiness of the Trump tariff portfolio. but it's still outpacing what the S&P 500 has done. Now, if we want to look at this on an annual basis, we can see what's occurred. So in 2000, it beat the S&P 500 handily. It beat it by 17.7%. In 2001, when the S&P was down, so was this portfolio, but it was down about 4-ish% less. In 2002, this portfolio performed very well. It was only down 3.47% versus the 22% of the S&P 500. Now, when things start to turn around, being in a blue chip, you're not going to see that massive rebound like you're seeing in 2003. The S&P was up 28.5%. The Trump tariff portfolio was only up 7.9%. But what you'll notice is that we had 1, 2, 3, 4 in 2015, and then there was a down year in 2024. Although it was minor, it was still negative. So out of the last 25 years that we're looking at, the Trump tariff portfolio, or that alternative, has only been down 5 of those years, and it's been down much less than what the S&P 500 has done. Now, the flip side of that, it hasn't been up as much as what the S&P 500 has done. In fact, since 2009, this hypothetical has actually performed relatively poorly to the S&P 500, but that has a lot to do with the technology exposures of the S&P 500 and the massive growth that came along with it. But what I want you to notice is that in 2025, the hypothetical portfolio is up 7.8% as compared to the 1.42% of the S&P 500. This whole talk of tariffs has the markets on edge. The markets don't know where to go because they don't know what policy is coming next. They tried to price it in with the election. When Trump was confirmed as president-elect, the markets cheered for that. But now that these policies are actually being implemented, the markets are reacting negatively because they were planning on some of these tariffs not even being an issue. And this is on top of the tax cuts and trying to make his tax cuts from 2017 permanent. We don't know what's going to happen from now through the end of this year or from now through the end of his presidency. But these tariffs have the markets shaken. They don't know what to do. They don't know where to go. And right now, it looks like down is what's going to continue to happen. Now, I want you to keep in mind this is a very hypothetical scenario. No one's going to take these 4 stocks and go build a portfolio and consider themselves well diversified because you have 3 of your 4 positions that are in the healthcare sector alone. But what I do want you to understand is that if you are actively managing your investments, there are areas where you can put your money and shield it from these policy decisions that are being made. Now, normally I wouldn't do a video like this because I'm not an individual stock guy. I know I own Verizon, but when I bought it, it was a 7% dividend yield and I couldn't pass it up. But that is the only individual stock I own. But when it comes to investing advice in general, I'm a very passive guy. We do the indexes and we just let it roll. But there is some level of excitement that comes with individual stocks. And that's clearly the case because I spent the time to look into these companies and figure out what's actually performing well when the rest of the market is just absolutely not. Again, don't take this as investing advice. It's just something that I wanted to put out to people that, hey, there are areas that you can look towards if you want a little bit more stability and you want to smooth out this ride that we're going to be on, at least for the foreseeable future. I want to thank you so much for tuning in. If this video or any of the other videos that I put out has provided you value, then hit that subscribe button. If you're looking for an easier way to invest your money or a more passive way to invest your money, check out this video right here. But I thank you so much for tuning in. I'll talk to you soon.